To attain such a point, the blood must be heated to 36 degrees, the pulse be, at least, at 90, and the feelings excited beyond the ordinary limit. But suppose one pass, as is permissible in philology, from the word itself to its softened synonym, then, instead of committing an ignoble assassination, you make an elimination, you merely and simply remove from your path the individual who is in your way, and that without shock or violence, without the display of the sufferings which, in the case of becoming a punishment, make a martyr of the victim, and a butcher, in every sense of the word, of him who inflicts them. Then there will be no blood, no groans, no convulsions, and above all, no consciousness of that horrid and compromising moment of accomplishing the act. Then one escapes the clutch of the human law, which says, "Do not disturb society." This is the mode in which they manage these things, and succeed in Eastern climes, where there are grave and phlegmatic persons who care very little for the questions of time and conjunctures of importance. Yet conscience remains, remarked Madame de Villefort in an agitated voice, and with a stifled sigh. Yes, answered Monte Cristo happily, yes, conscience does remain, and if it did not, how wretched we should be. After every action requiring exertion, it is conscience that saves us, for it supplies us with 1,000 good excuses, of which we alone are judges, and these reasons, howsoever excellent in producing sleep, would avail us but very little before a tribunal, when we were tried for our lives. Thus Richard III, for instance, was marvelously served by his conscience after the putting away of the 2 children of Edward IV. In fact, he could say, "These 2 children of a cruel and persecuting king, who have inherited the vices of their father, which I alone could perceive in their juvenile propensities, these 2 children are impediments in my way of promoting the happiness of the English people, whose unhappiness they, the children, would infallibly have caused." Thus was Lady Macbeth served by her conscience, when she sought to give her son, and not her husband, whatever Shakespeare may say, a throne. Ah, maternal love is a great virtue, a powerful motive, so powerful that it excuses a multitude of things, even if, after Duncan's death, Lady Macbeth had been at all pricked by her conscience. Madame de Villefort listened with avidity to these appalling maxims and horrible paradoxes, delivered by the Count with that ironical simplicity which was peculiar to him. After a moment's silence, the lady inquired, "Do you know, my dear Count," she said, "that you are a very terrible reasoner, and that you look at the world through a somewhat distempered medium?" "Have you really measured the world by scrutinies, or through alembics and crucibles?" "For you must indeed be a great chemist, and the elixir you administered to my son, which recalled him to life almost instantaneously." "Oh, do not place any reliance on that, madam. One drop of that elixir sufficed to recall life to a dying child, but 3 drops would have impelled the blood into his lungs in such a way as to have produced most violent palpitations, 6 would have suspended his respiration, and caused syncope more serious than that in which he was, 10 would have destroyed him." "You know, madam, how suddenly I snatched him from those phials which he so imprudently touched?" "Is it then so terrible a poison?" "Oh, no. In the first place, let us agree that the word poison does not exist, because in medicine use is made of the most violent poisons, which become, according as they are employed, most salutary remedies." "What, then, is it?" "A skillful preparation of my friends the worthy Abbé Adelmonte, who taught me the use of it." "Oh," observed Madame de Villefort, "it must be an admirable antispasmodic." "Perfect, madam, as you have seen," replied the Count, "and I frequently make use of it, with all possible prudence, though, be it observed," he added with a smile of intelligence, "Most assuredly," responded Madame de Villefort in the same tone. "As for me, so nervous, and so subject to fainting fits, I should require a Dr. Adelmonte to invent for me some means of breathing freely and tranquilizing my mind, in the fear I have of dying some fine day of suffocation." "In the meanwhile, as the thing is difficult to find in France, and your Abbé is not probably disposed to make a journey to Paris on my account, I must continue to use Monsieur Planche's antispasmodics, and mint and Hoffman's drops are among my favorite remedies." Here are some lozenges which I have made up on purpose, they are compounded doubly strong. Monte Cristo opened the tortoiseshell box, which the lady presented to him, and inhaled the odor of the lozenges with the air of an amateur who thoroughly appreciated their composition. They are indeed exquisite, he said, but as they are necessarily submitted to the process of deglutition, a function which it is frequently impossible for a fainting person to accomplish, I prefer my own specific. Undoubtedly, and so should I prefer it, after the effects I have seen produced, but of course it is a secret, and I am not so indiscreet as to ask it of you. But I, said Monte Cristo, rising as he spoke, I am gallant enough to offer it you. How kind you are. Only remember one thing, a small dose is a remedy, a large one is poison. One drop will restore life, as you have seen, 5 or 6 will inevitably kill, and in a way the more terrible inasmuch as, poured into a glass of wine, it would not in the slightest degree affect its flavor. But I say no more, madam, it is really as if I were prescribing for you. The clock struck 6:30, and a lady was announced, a friend of Madame de Villefort, who came to dine with her. If I had had the honor of seeing you for the 3rd or 4th time, Count, instead of only for the 2nd, said Madame de Villefort, if I had had the honor of being your friend, instead of only having the happiness of being under an obligation to you, I should insist on detaining you to dinner, and not allow myself to be daunted by a first refusal. A thousand thanks, madam, replied Monte Cristo, but I have an engagement which I cannot break. I have promised to escort to the Academia a Greek princess of my acquaintance who has never seen your grand opera, and who relies on me to conduct her thither. Adieu, then, sir, and do not forget the prescription. Ah, in truth, madam, to do that I must forget the hour's conversation I have had with you, which is indeed impossible. Monte Cristo bowed, and left the house. Madame de Villefort remained immersed in thought. He is a very strange man, she said, and in my opinion is himself the Adelmonte he talks about. As to Monte Cristo, the result had surpassed his utmost expectations. Good, said he, as he went away, This is a fruitful soil, and I feel certain that the seed sown will not be cast on barren ground. Next morning, faithful to his promise, he sent the prescription requested. Chapter 53. Robert Le Diable. The pretext of an opera engagement was so much the more feasible, as there chanced to be on that very night a more than ordinary attraction at the Académie Royale. Levasseur, who had been suffering under severe illness, made his reappearance in the character of Bertrand, and, as usual, the announcement of the most admired production of the favorite composer of the day had attracted a brilliant and fashionable audience. Mercier, like most other young men of rank and fortune, had his orchestra stall, with the certainty of always finding a seat in at least a dozen of the principal boxes occupied by persons of his acquaintance. He had, moreover, his right of entry into the omnibus box. Chateau Renaud rented a stall beside his own, while Beecham, as a journalist, had unlimited range all over the theater. It happened that on this particular night the minister's box was placed at the disposal of Lucien Debray, who offered it to the Comte de Mercier, who again, upon his mother's rejection of it, sent it to Danglars, with an intimation that he should probably do himself the honor of joining the Baroness and her daughter during the evening, in the event of their accepting the box in question. The ladies received the offer with too much pleasure to dream of a refusal. To no class of persons is the presentation of a gratuitous opera box more acceptable than to the wealthy millionaire, who still hugs economy while boasting of carrying a king's ransom in his waistcoat pocket. Danglars had, however, protested against showing himself in a ministerial box, declaring that his political principles, and his parliamentary position as member of the opposition party would not permit him so to commit himself. The Baroness had, therefore, dispatched a note to Lucien Debray, bidding him call for them, it being wholly impossible for her to go alone with Eugenie to the opera. There is no gainsaying the fact that a very unfavorable construction would have been put upon the circumstance if the two women had gone without escort, while the addition of a third, in the person of her mother's admitted lover, enabled Mademoiselle Danglars to defy malice and ill nature. One must take the world as one finds it. The curtain rose, as usual, to an almost empty house, it being one of the absurdities of Parisian fashion never to appear at the opera until after the beginning of the performance, so that the first act is generally played without the slightest attention being paid to it, that part of the audience already assembled being too much occupied in observing the fresh arrivals, while nothing is heard but the noise of opening and shutting doors, and the buzz of conversation.